A function is a mechanism for storing statements that can accept external data to modify its behavior and can also return a value. A concrete example is easier to understand than an abstract description. There are several different ways to create functions. We will start with the most common approach, which is known as a function declaration. The function declaration begins with the function keyword. This is followed by the name of the function, which follows the same naming rules as variables. Note that this also automatically creates a variable with the name of the function and refers to the function that is being created. Immediately following the function name is parentheses, which may or may not contain additional identifiers inside. We will return to that part a bit later. Following the parentheses is a code block known as the function body, which can contain 0 or more statements. The function body can contain any JavaScript code that would be valid outside of a function. A function just stores statements. To get them to execute, a function call is required. This is also sometimes referred to as an invocation, but function call is the more common terminology. To call a function, use the name of the function followed by parentheses. Not running until it is called is actually one of the benefits of using a function. A function can be called multiple times, and that causes the code in the function body to execute each time. If this example function had a lot more code, calling the function repeatedly instead of rewriting all the same code again would be more concise and also would avoid problems caused when refactoring, since you don't have to verify that the same changes were made everywhere. Note that there are other ways to repeat execution of code that we haven't covered yet, but all of those other techniques require that the repetitions happen immediately after each other. Functions don't require this. You can have other code in between repetitions. Functions are able to access variables declared both inside and outside of them. For example, this function accesses the person variable, which was declared outside of the function body. Although it is convenient to be able to use external variables, that can also lead to confusion and bugs if there are many variables present in the code. An alternative is to provide values directly to the function for it to use. To enable this, add parameters to the function definition, which are placed in between the parentheses. When calling the function, the value that you want to pass has to be placed in the parentheses that accompany the function call. In this code, person is a parameter and John is an argument. Note that many people are confused about this point and use the two words interchangeably. A parameter is in a function definition and an argument is in the function call. What happens in this code is the person parameter takes on the value of John because that was the argument passed to it in the function call. The parameter can then be used inside the function as if it was an ordinary variable that was initialized with the value passed to it in the function call. The parameter only holds the value during the execution of the function and does not retain it between function calls. So it is possible to call this function again with different names and the output changes. It is possible for a function to have multiple parameters. For example, we can refactor this code to accept a greet word instead of always using the same one. Note that the order of the arguments is important. Which parameter gets which argument depends exclusively on the order. Parameters can have a default value. For example, we may want the greet word to be hello most of the time while allowing the possibility to override it. A default value is specified by placing an equal sign after the parameter name, followed by the default value. The function call can then omit an argument that corresponds to a parameter that has a default value. Because default values are used via omission of arguments, parameters that don't have default values should come before parameters that do have them. Observe what happens if we try to give a default value to person, but no default value for greet word. The first function call causes the greet word to be undefined because no arguments are passed. The second function call still causes greet word to be undefined because the sole argument given is automatically treated as being a value for the first parameter, which is person. To get the default value applied to the first parameter while also providing a value for greet word, it is necessary to explicitly use undefined as the first argument. This negates the brevity of having default parameter values, so it is better to put all parameters with default values after the parameters that don't have them. All functions return a value. If you don't specify a return value, it returns undefined. We have already made use of function return values, although I did not describe it with that terminology before. When we used math.round to round a number, it returned a value which was the rounded version of the number passed to it as an argument. In this code, round is a function. It's a specific type of function known as a method. We will discuss what that means at a later time. To specify a return value in our own functions, place a value after the return keyword. The function call can then be used as if it was an ordinary variable that had the value that was returned. Execution of the return statement also terminates execution of the function. This is true even if there is more code after the return statement. The console log in this code never runs because it comes after a return statement. It is possible to assign a function to a variable. Notice that no parentheses were used in this assignment because the value being assigned is the function and not the function's return value. The variable is then followed by parentheses to call it. For comparison, let's look at what would happen when using parentheses during the assignment. The number variable holds the return value of 5 and does not hold a reference to the function. Since it isn't a function, number also cannot be called. It is just used like a regular variable because that is what it is. If you assign a function to a variable and the function has parameters, you can pass arguments to the variable the same way as you would in a regular function call. Because it is possible to assign a function to a variable, there is an alternate way to create a function using what is known as a function expression. The name of the function was removed after the function keyword. It is allowed for the name to remain, but that is only useful when the code inside the function needs to refer to the function that the code is in. This is a topic we will discuss in a future video. It is common to not need to be able to do this, so the function name can be omitted. This creates something known as an anonymous function. Note that the function in this code doesn't have a name. The variable name is not the function's name. This point can be made clearer by assigning the value of this function to two different variables. This function can now be called using math operation or doubler. Neither of these is the name of the function. They are the names of variables that hold a reference to a function that has no name. There are some differences between the accessibility of function declarations and function expressions that we will discuss later. There is a special type of anonymous function expression known as an arrow function. An arrow function uses the equal sign followed immediately by the greater than sign. This combination creates something that looks like an arrow, which is the reason for the name. The structure of an arrow function begins with parameters followed by the arrow followed by the function body. This arrow function can actually be rewritten in an even more compact form without parentheses, braces, or the return keyword. The parentheses are optional when there is exactly one parameter. They are required if there are 0 or multiple parameters. Braces can be omitted if there is only one statement, and omitting the braces automatically returns the value after the arrow. It is because arrow functions are concise that they tend to be used a lot, but they are not exactly the same as regular functions. The commented out code outputs the same values as the arrow function. There are some slight differences in how arrow functions work, but we will discuss those differences at a later time. There is much more to the topic of functions. It is actually a very deep topic which we will need to revisit many times. Instead of focusing exclusively on functions next time, we will cover the topic of scope, which affects any code containing a code block. This includes functions, if statements, and other features of the JavaScript language that we haven't covered yet.